No one had ever done it. Now at this point, I have been influenced for many, many years by what I consider to be the leading literary work. I keep a copy of this book in my bookcase, and it helps me in situations of this kind. And you've probably read the book, The Little Red Hen. And what does the little red hen say when she is put in a situation where no one will help her? Then I'll do it myself. And so if no one had done a table of contents of the disseminator, then the little red hen guides you and you do it yourself. The other book that I keep on my bookcase then helps you get through this, The Little Engine That Could. Two great literary works. I went through the first 2 years of the disseminator and copied down the headlines of all of the papers. So that's 54 of them. And they are here at the Working Men's Institute now. I looked at the kinds of articles that were in the disseminator and thought they could be broken into 3 different kinds of articles. The first were what I called major articles that covered quite a bit. And let me back up and give you some vital statistics about the disseminator, which I needed first. 16 pages in length, published every other week, and a year's subscription for $1. So that was, and there's no advertisements in it. I don't know. This was, and so there were the major articles, and Maclure contributed to many of these major articles. His essays on education, his essays on politics, his letters from Mexico. But then Thomas Say wrote a series of 8 articles on molluscan fauna. That's mussels and shells. There's a series of about 7 articles called Geometrical, which look kind of like a textbook of plane geometry, explaining some of the principles of geometry. And then there's also reprints of articles from other publications. And I guess in those days, I don't know if you needed permission, you could just copy someone else giving them credit. So that he prints a number of these as serial. They appear issue after issue. It takes over a year for him to go through a book called Systems of Nature. And he copies articles from the Westminster Review. There was one on education that appeared in at least a dozen issues. Then there are short articles. These long articles out of those 16 pages may take up 13 pages. Then you'll have a couple of pages devoted to short articles. And these cover everything from lightning bugs, blood circulation, origin of volcanoes, polarized light, languages of the world. And then the last page, sometimes the last 2 pages, are, I guess, what I would call helpful hints. Helpful hints on how to do a variety of things, how to preserve foods, and the list goes on and goes on and on. Let me read you one of the tables of contents from a disseminator so you can get a flavoring of what's in it. This was from the February 25th, 1829. There's 4 major articles. The first one is Political number 17, the essay by Maclure. The next article is called Situation of the Clergy, an article by Robert Dale Owen, who is pretty critical of the clergy. He says, artificial inducement to adhere to any creed is mischievous. So that would have been, And then chapter 9th, and this is from the book Systems of Nature. And then from the Westminster Review is the continuation of an article on Canada. So these major articles take up the first 13 and a half pages. Then he's got 2 shorter articles. And ask me where he got this stuff. Boiling Mud Lake of Java. And then a description of a bird, a description of a downed bird or elder duck. And then the last page contains 4 how to do things. For a pain in the ear, to take iron mold from linen, a fireproof and waterproof cement, and excellent medicine for shortness of breath. These are the kinds of useful knowledge that Maclure thought the average working man used. And so let's go through and I'll go through some of these useful knowledges, these useful hints that he gives to people. They cover things from preserving food to cleaning cloth. There's mechanical things. There's a tip for how to dye cotton, bleach cloth, prepare flax. And you can remove a grease spot from silk by take a little sulfuric ether and wetting the spot of the grease with it, let the ether evaporate. And if the grease is not yet completely gone, wet again with ether. If this procedure is used, it will remove the stain without injuring the silk to the smallest degree. Yes, some of these ingredients are mysteries to us today, but of course in those days pharmacies were actually they were chemistry stores, and people were aware of all of these names. Unlike the throwaway culture of today, it was important in Maclure's day to know how to preserve things, how to mend things. For example, broken china. Take a piece of flint glass, beat it into a fine powder, and grind it well with the white of an egg, and it joins china without riveting. And to waterproof your shoes or boots, take a pint of linseed oil with 1/2 pound of mutton suet, 6 or 8 ounces of beeswax, and a small piece of rosin. Boil and let cool, and then with a hairbrush, lay it on new boots or shoes. Numerous tips on how to preserve and prepare foods. For example, make soup from bones, preserve apples for winter, sweeten mildewed corn, roast wild fowl, and to remove the turnip flavor from milk or butter, dissolve a little niter, potassium nitrate, in spring water, and put a small teacup full in 8 gallons of milk warm from the cow. There's recommendations for curing potassium nitrate, that's gunpowder. There's recommendations for curing whooping cough, kidney stones, ear and toothaches, how to make a liniment for joint pain, remove warts by rubbing an apple over them, and a paste for chapped hands can be made by mix 1/4 pound of unsalted hog lard, which has been washed and then in rose water, with the yolk of 2 new laid eggs and a large spoonful of honey. Add as much fine oatmeal or almond paste as will work into a paste. These may be some projects you can try next year. I mean, they might work. You know, there are instructions for killing crickets by putting Scotch snuff in their holes, for getting rid of moles by introducing garlic into their tunnels, and hardening a wooden pulley by boiling it in olive oil, which is said to make it as hard as copper. An individual with mechanical aptitudes could learn how to make a balance for weighing, solder brass and copper, make screws, process steel, and how to crush and wash lead ore. Occasionally there was what I called a Miss Manners comment on how you behave. There's advice, giving advice on rules of conversation, your choice of company, and even how a young lady should behave in order to get married. It's really best if I not comment on that. Now, when you say, read what Maclure says and get some quotes, easier said than done. First of all, there is a lot of the wordage that he uses is archaic by today's standards. But most of all, it is sentence construction. What you did in Maclure's time was you wanted to express an idea, so you express your idea, and then there's clause after clause after clause that elaborates and supports this idea. For example, in his political essay number 19, there's one sentence consisting of 285 words, punctuated with 16 commas, 5 semicolons, and a colon. Now, you know, to the student of 20th century high school English, the thought of diagramming that sentence would be just terrifying. And so really, I had no option but to really ignore these sorts of things. They might contain somewhere in one of those clauses a nice part of an idea, but to try to edit those down would kind of lose. I felt it was maybe distorting the whole thing, so I ignored them. But Maclure is wordy enough that he expresses the same ideas again and again and again, and I could find that same idea in a shortened statement. And I always wondered whether these were short statements or he really just ran out of ink. The other thing that I noticed is, and this I think is a result of his scientific training, how he classifies things. You've got to constantly in the sciences, you're classifying rock into igneous and metamorphic and trigonometry and those sorts of things. But he does it when he talks, and I don't know whether this means that Maclure saw things in really black and white, and there was no shades of gray for him. This would be something for someone else to look at. But here's what he says in one of his letters from Mexico on the people. The population of this country may perhaps be divided into 3 classes: native Indians, a mixture of Native Americans, and people of European, let me read that again, a mixture of Native Indians and people of European or African descent and Europeans. And you'll like this one. Education may be divided into 2 species, like mankind, that is the productive and the non-productive, the useful and the ornamental, the necessary and amusing. And then he really gets started. All trades and professions may be divided into 2 great classes: those that give you something solid and useful, and those that give you only air, modified by the throat and mouth into sounds called words. The first is the return the industrious producers give you for your money. The second is what the non-productive classes communicate to you, for which they demand an indefinite price, sometimes 10 times the price they would bring if uttered with a mouth without a beard. So, well, I'll start with Maclure's political quotes. It's interesting, we think of Maclure mostly in terms of his views on education, but he really wrote more on politics than he ever wrote on education. Even his educational essays are first published in the New Harmony Gazette in 1827, and the following year, when he founds the disseminator, he reprints those. He puts them in a different order, but he never wrote anything that I could find just on education, brand new, just for the disseminator. See, I think we know him for his education because of his organizing the boatload of knowledge, founding of Pestalozzian schools, the Working Men's Institute, and of course his estate going to the creation of libraries. I've concluded that estate money going to an educational institution is called an endowment, whereas estate money diverted to a political institution is called inheritance tax.